a number of schools had their profile re-examined, resulting in a number of schools getting, on average, an extra 13 hours per school. That's in relation to the reviews that have been completed to date. It's resulted on average of 13 extra hours per school, and schools will be notified of their allocation by the end of this month. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. That concludes topical issues. We now move business on to the private member's business motion, RE neutrality and the triple lock. People before profit, I believe, are taking that. And just to get the time allocations, please. Yeah, so opening with Deputy Breed Smith, I believe, for 15 minutes, followed by Deputy Jean O'Kenny for 5.
We don't have Antánaiste here.
The Antánaiste will be here very shortly and will be given the opening response on behalf of the government. But in the meantime, I'll be sitting.
You'll be listening and you'll tell him what I say. I'm going to talk to you as if you were him, okay?
That's fine.
Yeah, all right.
In your eyes to the position of Antánaiste for next.
Yeah, the position of Antánaiste for 5 minutes.
Yeah. And Deputy Smith, I just have to ask you for formality to move the motion.
Yes, I move the motion.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, so Minister, there's a dark open secret at the heart of the political establishment in this country. You're embarrassed by the very idea of Irish neutrality, because when you trot off to Washington every Patrick's Day to give the shamrock to the US President, you're dreading the question, why are you not doing more to support the American project and American freedom? And so you have a problem. The vast majority of Irish people want to keep neutrality, so you have to manoeuvre and try to get around this sentiment. Your latest move is to try to remove the triple lock so that you are free to send Irish troops. Not your sons and daughters, but Irish troops to send wars at the beck and call of the US and the European Union. You've tried to prepare for this move, Taoiseach. You even set up a commission chaired by a dame of the British Empire, but it has backfired on you. And you only talk about military neutrality. You insist on inserting the word military before the word neutrality, and there's a reason for this. You want to ignore how the Irish people think of neutrality, and you want to degut it of its real meaning. For the majority of Irish people, neutrality arises from our experience of colonialism. It's linked to an anti-colonial sentiment, and that is why we instinctively know what side we are on in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We do not want to support any empire. We know that behind the sweet talk of defending small nations lies a brutal arrogance. And don't tell me we have left the world of empires because history has left it behind. There are still some colonies left, Palestine, of course, being one of them. There is a hierarchy in this world based on military and economic power. That hierarchy is called imperialism. The US administration does not come to Dublin bearing gifts. We go to Washington to show our loyalty and support, or at least you go to Washington to show loyalty and support. And it makes us laugh when today you claim that you belong to the Western Empire because it talks of freedom and democracy. Where is the freedom and democracy for the Palestinians? Where are the women's rights in Saudi Arabia that your patron, the US, describes as its ally in the Middle East? Do you really think that by simply recognising the state of Palestine, as you have done yesterday, that you've done your duty in the face of genocide? Do you not know that 140 countries have taken this step long before you, and that even this step has been forced on you by the tens of thousands who marched week after week after week? The plain reality is that the US empire does not stand for freedom and democracy. If it did, it wouldn't be supplying Israel with the bombs to murder and burn Palestinian children. The Dáil recognises Palestine, but then why are we all using Hewlett-Packard machines in our offices? This is a company that supplies infrastructure that is vital for Israel's occupation, and we say boycott them. And then there's AXA. No state agency should have a contract with a company which invests in Israeli banks and mining companies in the West Bank. We say boycott them. And then why is the Irish government, and I asked this yesterday, fast-tracking visas for 100 Israeli engineers to fly in here to work for Intel, and meantime Palestinians who are fleeing genocide are left to sleep in tents on the banks of the canal. Why is the Irish state supporting this? Intel is a huge supporter of the Israeli state. It has built its Kiryat Gat plant on the site of 2 erased Palestinian villages. And just weeks after Israel intensified its genocide against the Palestinians, Intel announced its largest ever investment in Israel, $22.6 billion. I say boycott them. Why did the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment grant 32 licences to sell dual-use goods worth $70.4 million into Israel under the Control of Exports Act 2008? Why won't you name these companies? We do need to back up the recognition of Palestine with real sanctions, and don't just tell the EU leaders that tell us that EU leaders are discussing sanctions. That means nothing. We are now 7 months into the Israeli horrific conflict, and the EU leaders have done nothing. The plain reality is that when you want to remove the triple lock because you want to move from a sideline substitute to the US imperialism to a full player, that's what you want, and you want to send Irish troops abroad to fight wars on their behalf and on behalf of the European Union. But despite the repeated requests from us, you've refused to say exactly where you want to send more than 12 Irish troops. You've asked your civil servants to come up with some obscure examples of where the triple lock has stopped you sending Irish troops. But come on, you need to have the courage of your convictions and tell us where you want to send the sons and daughters of working class people to fight for wars for the benefit of Western imperialism. If you won't give us a referendum to testify that Irish people still want to keep their neutrality, which is the least you can do, you know as well as me that the chair of NATO committee has said that we are preparing for war. You know that the Polish Prime Minister has already said we are in a pre-war situation. And the Irish Times, even in their own snooty way, recently declared that Ireland is at war, but we are sticking our heads in the sand. So come on, tell us where you want to send Irish troops. For our part, we're absolutely clear. We oppose both imperialist powers that seek to divide the world into their respective spheres of influence. I'm openly opposed to the US empire, equally opposed to the Russian-Chinese rivals. I've been on many protests outside the US embassy. My party was the first to organise protests outside the Russian embassy over the brutal invasion of Ukraine. And while I detest both imperialist powers, I have no time for the double standards of this government. It took you 7 months before you dared to raise the Palestinian flag at this stall. You raised the Ukrainian flag immediately when it was invaded and is still flying there. Ukraine is right to oppose the Russian invasion, but it is not the only country fighting imperialism. Why are you not denouncing the EU for not banning arms sales to Israel when they sanctioned Russia immediately the invasion happened? Why are Fine Gael members of your coalition promising to vote for Ursula von der Leyen, even though she has most brazenly backed Israel to the hilt? Your other way of getting around neutrality is to erode it, bit by bit by bit. And you've let US troops use Shannon Airport as a transit point and pretend this is just an economic arrangement, and in reality, it's a deliberate show of loyalty to the US empire. And now you want to send Irish troops to train the Ukrainian soldiers, you send helmets to its army, and you still pretend that you're militarily neutral. We are sick of your hypocrisy, and I make one call from this Dáil today, and the same call is being made in the Shannon, to stop US troops using Shannon Airport. Genocide Joe is totally complicit in the murder of Palestinians. And we want to see a left government that really changes that. And I say to my colleagues in Sinn Féin, we know that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael will keep US troops in Shannon for as long as they can. So let's work together to evict Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And this is a commitment we want to make before there's any general election. US troops out of Shannon at a very minimum.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, we're living in very dangerous times. We're living in times of where international law, the norms, even in warfare, is being breached on a daily basis, and we only have to see what's going on in Gaza. The pictures and the images are just incomprehensible, what Israel is doing to human beings, children, women and men. And in that kind of context, Irish neutrality has always been sacred. It's been sacred from the foundation of the state. And the overwhelming majority of Irish people have supported neutrality because they understand if neutrality is eroded, we can be kind of pulled into conflicts, not of our making, where our citizens are maimed. And we've seen throughout the last 100 years in World War I and World War II, where countries got dragged into imperialist wars. So it's super important that our neutrality stays the way it is, and it's not compromised. But I believe it has been compromised and eroded over the last number of decades and well beyond. And I think it's that by language and by deeds, and particularly the militarisation of the European Union. And you just have to look at the European Defence Industrial Strategy. This is a precursor to a European defence model and a European defence army. They spend hundreds of billions of euros in terms of military hardware, and it's you only have to look at throughout history where there's more militarisation, where there's more equipment for war. It's going to be used eventually, and we've just seen that, as I said, via the European Union. You look at the European battle groups, Irish troops are engaged with that. That is very controversial in terms of our neutrality. What's really worrying is, particularly in the last number of decades, is where economical blocks are morphing from economical competition to potential conflict, where competition then turns into a conflict. And we've seen this in the Pacific, we've seen this in the Middle East, and we've seen this in other parts of the world. And this is extremely dangerous in terms of not only Ireland's neutrality, but for world peace. I mean, the blatant breach of Irish neutrality is the use of Shannon Airport by American troops. I mean, remember this, America invaded Iraq in 2003 illegally. And the consequences of that, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians were killed by American troops, and the kind of in pursuing subsequently then the civil war that happened. Hundreds of thousands of people died because of that illegal invasion. And yet Ireland facilitated millions of American troops going through Shannon Airport. Now that's a blatant breach of our neutrality, blatant breach. And that has to stop. Any government that that's calls themselves left has to stop that blatant breach of what's continued to happen in Iraq. So, Taoiseach, neutrality is sacred. It's very dear to the Irish people, and it's very dear to people that love peace and do not want to be dragged into other people's wars, because that's what has happened in the past. And our neutrality is so important in terms of not being dragged into them wars, them conflicts. But again, I would argue the language and rhetoric that's been used by this government in terms of the triple lock, in terms of the militarisation, is extremely worrying. It's extremely worrying that there's a potential that Irish troops could be actually involved in a European army via a European conflict, particularly around what's happening in Ukraine and elsewhere. So on that basis, our neutrality has to be kind of put in the Constitution that we can never, ever, under any circumstance, ever be involved in military pacts or European wars in terms of where the European Union's gone. So neutrality is sacred, but that has to be enshrined in our Constitution. Thank you.
I'm grateful for the opportunity today to talk about the current state of the world, Ireland's place in the world, and our country's policy of military neutrality. Given the language used in the motion, I think it's useful to begin with an examination of what we mean when we talk about military neutrality. Simply put, our policy of military neutrality as practised by successive governments means that Ireland does not participate in military alliances or common or mutual defence arrangements. I've discussed this many times in the House, and I'm happy to clarify and put it on the record again today. We have no plans to alter this policy. Our military neutrality means a great deal to a great many people. The history and the instincts that inform it are important and valuable, and I understand that. And its birth is essentially World War II and the position of Eamon de Valera and the then Fianna Fáil government to adopt a policy of neutrality on that occasion. It has evolved since then, and particularly in the context of developing an independent foreign policy. However, the fact that it is and will remain our policy does not mean that we can isolate ourselves from the international security environment we find ourselves in today. All of us as serious-minded policymakers must continue to observe and analyse the situation as it evolves and ensure that the application of our policies remain fit for purpose in changing circumstances. Ireland's foreign policy has always been grounded in the principles of international law, human rights, equality, respect, dialogue and engagement. We have correctly sought to position ourselves as a voice for good in the world, as a champion of international humanitarian law, peacekeeping and peace building, disarmament and non-proliferation, and as a strong defender of a rules-based international order. I haven't heard any of that from the contributions I've heard so far this morning, just ignored. Just look at our record over the last 2 to 3 decades in terms of our role internationally, our role on the UN Security Council most recently, in terms of pushing for humanitarian corridors in the most troubled parts of the world and in terms of peacekeeping. Our values must remain at the core of Irish foreign policy. Indeed, the Irish people would expect nothing less from this or any government. There are many countries in the world with which Ireland shares similar values and whose foreign policy approach is in keeping with our own. Some of these are members of military alliances or common defence arrangements. Some of these are not. We work with any and all of them as the issue requires. A salient example of our close engagement with such partners happened just last week in the context of our recognition of the State of Palestine, together with Spain and Norway. And again, in terms of that issue, we were right to do it in a coordinated way. We were right to do it in terms of both timing, coordination and impact, and in the context of the Arab peace vision. The security of our people and our country is one of the most important issues that any government must consider. So I think I would like to talk about how this relates to our broader foreign policy and the reality of the world today. Across the globe and at home, Ireland and our EU partners face an increasingly challenging and contested security environment. Russia's illegal, immoral and ongoing invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 brought untold misery to countless of Ukrainian citizens. It has had an impact in our own country that we discuss and debate here on a daily basis. It also shattered the collective European security architecture, and doing so brought home to many across Europe and beyond the cold, hard reality of the world we live in today. In the same context, we know that Russia is demonstrating increasingly irresponsible behaviour beyond Ukraine, including through cyber attacks across the European Union. Russia and other foreign actors are also deliberately targeting European societies, including Ireland, with false and manipulated information. We need to call out these threats and work with partners to confront them. In Europe's southern neighbourhood, we continue to face a horrible and completely unjustifiable conflict in the Middle East. Again, an issue that we discuss and debate here on a regular basis. The government has been absolutely clear that this appalling war must stop. There must be an immediate ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and a massive scaling up of humanitarian assistance. And as we've repeatedly said, we urgently need a political pathway towards peace that leads to a two-state solution which respects the right of self-determination of both Israel and Palestine. And that's where I disagree with the deputies opposite, who want the dismantlement of the Israeli state. And that will not bring peace either. In Africa too, hunger and poverty continues to drive conflict, instability and displacement. And this is an issue that is rarely discussed in this House, but it is massive in scale and is a major factor in terms of our own security here in Europe. Faced with this reality of this security environment, we cannot afford to tie our hands, to isolate ourselves or to ignore our responsibilities towards our own citizens, our fellow EU member states or other friendly partners. The motion put forward by People Before Profit Solidarity Group is therefore problematic for a number of reasons. Firstly, it demonstrates a complete failure to understand the policy of military neutrality. And as I've said, this means that Ireland does not participate in military alliances or common or mutual defence arrangements. As implemented, it reflects our security policies and the interests of the state. The motion by People Before Profit and the remarks by some in the opposition regarding the amendment, the proposed amending of the triple lock, are also deliberately erroneous, misleading and dishonest. There is no implication whatsoever through the amendment of the triple lock and Irish military neutrality. Absolutely dishonest to suggest that.
Please,
and in
Deputy.
reality, the government's proposed modification of the triple, I didn't interrupt anyone, and Deputy Murphy, a bit of courtesy and parliamentary decorum is called for me from time to time. You hate when the truth is told. In reality, the government's proposed modification of the triple lock does not impact in any way on our policy of military neutrality. In fact, the proposed changes will serve to reinforce Ireland's ability to pursue an independent foreign policy by removing the power of UN Security Council permanent members to veto our national sovereign decisions. It will mean that Ireland, militarily neutral, will no longer need to seek the permission of Russia, China, Britain, France or the United States to pursue our own sovereign, independent, militarily neutral interests, or indeed to participate in peacekeeping missions. So, Deputy Smith, we're simply saying we'll amend the triple lock so we don't depend on the empires. You've spoken at large about the empires, yet you want the empires to have a restriction on the peacekeeping through the veto on the Security Council that Ireland could participate in the future. There's no logic to your position. And in your world of empires, you still want those very same empires to have a veto on whether Ireland participates in peacekeeping or not. I don't want Russia in particular. Make no apology for singling out Russia. Its behaviour is singularly shocking. You don't have the same emphasis in Russia. You don't have weekly marches against Russia. You'll do the occasional formulaic protests outside the embassy. You will identify the United States all of the time. Fine, I don't believe US foreign policy is correct in all areas, but I do recognise the huge Irish-American diaspora. I don't believe, Deputy, in boycotting Hewlett-Packard. I don't believe in boycotting Intel. The Deputy's opposite would cause the loss of thousands of jobs in this country if their reckless policies were to be pursued. And I don't believe in doing that. But I don't believe that the Security Council members should have a veto on our participation in peacekeeping. And that is not in any shape or form an attempt to disengage from the UN. It's rather the opposite. It will allow Ireland to continue to seek to improve the UN from within, while addressing the fact that our involvement in international peacekeeping can currently be held hostage by the veto-wielding power of any one of the 5 permanent UN Security Council members. Secondly, the government would have real concerns about the proposal to hold a referendum enshrining neutrality in the Constitution. The policy of military neutrality has always been and remains a deliberate policy choice on the part of successive governments since the Second World War. However, this motion, if passed, would seriously constrain the Executive's ability to exercise its policy-making authority in the conduct of external relations, as already set out in Article 29 of the Constitution. Indeed, we know from previous experience that inserting overly simplistic provisions into the Constitution on sensitive and complex issues does not serve this state. Well, I have yet to see any proposed wording about an insertion or amendment on putting what form of neutrality? What definition of neutrality? I'm talking about a general debate. We know, Deputy, what happens in referendum and so on.
You have 10 minutes to reply.
And thirdly, in the view of the government, the motion fails to adequately reflect the reality of the situation in terms of the use of Shannon Airport. I know this is a hardy perennial for the Deputy's opposite, but as the government has repeatedly set out, all foreign military aircraft wishing to overfly or land in the state require diplomatic clearance, and this is subject to strict conditions, including that the aircraft is unarmed and carries no arms, ammunition or explosives. It's also expressly prohibited for civil aircraft to carry munitions of war in Ireland without an exemption to do so by the Minister for Transport. There is a robust process in place for such exemptions, which includes advice from the Department of Foreign Affairs in respect of international humanitarian law and Ireland's international obligations. Let me reiterate once again that there are no transports of weaponry via Shannon or any other Irish airport to Israel, nor are the US troops transiting Shannon going to Israel or any other active conflict. In short, from a government perspective, the motion as presented is ill-conceived, partisan and inherently problematic. It fails to demonstrate an understanding of what the policy of military neutrality actually means. It completely neglects the security risks that Europe and Ireland face today. And the proposal in terms of neutrality, in my view, is particularly ill-defined, inappropriate, and would significantly restrict future governments in terms of broader foreign policy and more important in terms of security challenges like cyber attacks and so forth, and in terms of subsea cables. We need the Oireachtas, people elect the Oireachtas and the government to develop foreign policy and to develop policies, and that's the sensible way to proceed. And the last year's consultative forum was a very important forum, and what was striking was the attempts by the deputies opposite to stop it from ever happening. And I thought it was fundamentally undermining democracy itself. There's a really strong intolerance of democracy from the Deputy's office. It's their way or the highway. And in terms of the Middle East, Ireland's position in the Middle East over the last 3 decades and more has been principled, has been informed by the desire to get peace, to support the humanitarian needs of Palestinians, and we've raised it all over the world, including in the US. Unlike Sinn Féin, who didn't raise it at all with their colleagues in the United States, have never, through the very large fora that Sinn Féin have in the United States, you've never really raised the Palestinian question as loudly as you've raised it here. And no, that's the truth. That is the truth. And it's always puzzled me. It's always puzzled me.
Deputies.
Why Sinn Féin.
Deputies.
You know, why Sinn Féin's social media platforms were never used extensively to promote your ideas around Palestine. Those are the reality. No, because your main focus in the United States is fundraising, not raising issues around foreign policy. That's the reality. That's the fact. We are military neutral as a country. We're not politically neutral. We'll stand for human rights. We'll stand for freedom, for democracy, for the rules-based international order, and the approach suffuses everything we do, whether in relation to the conflict in Gaza or the invasion of Ukraine. Our international engagement is also underpinned by significant investment in our own security and defence architecture, and this includes work to transform our defence forces by increasing annual spending to 1.5 billion. I think I'm running out of time, Cathaoirleach, and thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Murphy for 10 minutes.
Taoiseach, you should be honest with people. You should have the courage of your convictions to argue for what you're in favour of. Instead, we had a very dishonest presentation of what you're trying to do. We've had a dishonest presentation for the last 2 years. For people out there, anyone who's watching, who listened to that speech, you'd have the impression the government is committed to defending neutrality. Modification of the triple lock does not impact in any way on our policy of military neutrality. In fact, you're going to go even further. You're going to enshrine, make it better, reinforce our ability to pursue an independent foreign policy. And you'd have the impression that it's the opposition that are intolerant of democracy. Yeah, none of that's true, Taoiseach, is it? No, it's not. I'll tell you why it's not true. One, who is intolerant of democracy? Taoiseach. Yeah.
No, you have the floor.
I will. Thank you. Exactly. Our behaviour at the Consultative Forum. What was the Consultative Forum? The Consultative Forum was not a democratic institution, Taoiseach. You proposed a democratic institution. You proposed a citizens' assembly so the citizens could come together and discuss it and come up with an outcome. And then Taoiseach, you ditched. Taoiseach, you ditched that democratic proposal and you replaced it with a hand-picked group of people with a predetermined outcome that I predicted in advance to recommend to get rid of the triple lock. Taoiseach, that's not democracy. I tell you what democracy is. Democracy is people standing for election on the basis of a certain platform, winning votes on that basis, and then proceeding to implement it. So you stood for election in 2020 general elections on a certain basis. What was that? It was on the basis of a promise, this is a quote from the Fianna Fáil manifesto, to quote, fully maintain neutrality and the triple lock. And you won votes on that basis. And then you put it into the programme for government. Taoiseach, that's democracy. What is intolerant of democracy, Taoiseach, is for you to tear up your election promises because you think, got it, now's the chance to get rid of our military neutrality. Secondly, you would lead the people to believe that you have no intention of touching neutrality whatsoever. Sure, it's one of these big myths, the idea that you're interested in getting rid of neutrality. Again, Taoiseach, that's not true, is it? You are not telling the truth to people. Because we can go back to the time of when Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine began, and what was it that you said? You said then that neutrality is a policy issue that can change at any time, And then you said that there needs to be reflection, quote, on military non-alignment in Ireland and our military neutrality. Not so much commitment to neutrality there, is there? You weren't the only one. You weren't the only one. The Taoiseach at the time, Leo Varadkar, said exactly the same thing. Simon Coveney said exactly the same thing, the Minister for Foreign Affairs. And so what happened then was that the government decided this is our moment to try and get rid of military neutrality. What happened then, and the reason you ditched the proposal for the Citizens' Assembly, is because you ran into the roadblock of public opinion. Public opinion, despite all the attempts to massage it, to say we need to have this mature debate and so on, maintained steadfastly in favour of neutrality. You could not shift it. It didn't change your attitude, which is a long-standing attitude of Fine Gael in particular, what you previously described as a long-standing ideological obsession of Fine Gael to get rid of the triple lock. You can go back 20 years to their policy document Beyond Neutrality. It didn't change your plan, but it changed the presentation of your plan. So now, no longer would you try to get rid of neutrality. Instead, you would simply try to redefine what neutrality means, and as part of that, tear up the triple lock. And that's what's reflected in your speech today. How you define neutrality today is simply Ireland does not participate in military alliances or common or mutual defence arrangements. That's it. So according to you, Taoiseach, according to you, Irish troops could have been sent, and perhaps would have been sent if it wasn't for the triple lock, could have been sent to participate in the US invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. Yes, Taoiseach, because as long as we did not formally participate in NATO, you are saying that that is still military neutrality. You are redefining neutrality in order to say as long as we're not formally in NATO, we can join in all the missions, we'll send the troops abroad, which is what this is actually about, getting rid of the triple lock. That's your actual agenda. We are still neutral. That's what your agenda is here. Don't tell me about dishonesty, because Taoiseach, do not tell me about dishonesty.
But I please just hold it, please, just for a moment, please.
Yep.
Deputy Murphy has the floor, but I'd like he might tone down his comments a small bit. But at the same time, I expect the Taoiseach as well. Yes, thank you.
So the Taoiseach doesn't like hearing the truth. So the Taoiseach tells us today that the proposed modification of the triple lock does not impact in any way on our policy of military neutrality. That wasn't always your position, Taoiseach, was it? Was it the case that in 2013 that you said that the triple lock is at the core of our neutrality? Not something peripheral, not something separate, but at the core of our neutrality, you said in the Dáil, and you were absolutely correct when you said it. And why is it at the core of our neutrality? Because without it, and this gets to the heart of it, this is your actual agenda, without it, a government, which will have a majority in the Dáil, would have been able to send troops to participate in the invasion of Iraq, and according to your own definition, we'd still be neutral in doing so as long as we didn't formally join NATO. That's absolutely what this is about. I want to tear up some of the other dishonest presentations by the Taoiseach. The Taoiseach said that if we get rid of the triple lock, we will no longer need to seek the permission of Russia, China, United States, United Kingdom, or anyone else. Exactly. A very dishonest presentation. Because people would be left with the impression that if Ireland wants to send troops abroad somewhere, we have to go to the Security Council and seek a vote of the Security Council in order to authorise that. Taoiseach, that's not what happens, is it? What the triple lock is about is saying that we can send troops on peacekeeping missions where they are authorised by the Dáil, by the government, and by the UN. This notion, not through the security, wrong. And that's, again, you're engaged in a very dishonest debate because you're not referring to the 2016 Defence Amendment Act, which changed that. This is not about the Security Council. The notion of any country having a veto is a complete and utter red herring. You go to the 2006 Act, which is explicitly about dealing with this issue, and it changed it. It said UN approval, which is explicitly not just UN Security Council authorisation and UN command, but also, I quote from the Act, an international force or body established, mandated, authorised, endorsed, supported, approved, or otherwise sanctioned by a resolution of the Security Council, and this is the important bit, or before the General Assembly of the United Nations. There is no Security Council veto. It's in black and white in our current law. And the current arguments that the government is making about getting rid of the triple lock were the arguments that were made for the 2006 Act. This has been dealt with. If, for example, there was a regional peacekeeping mission into Gaza or wherever else, and there was a veto at the UN Security Council, but it was passed by a vote of the General Assembly, by a majority vote of the General Assembly, that would meet the terms of the triple lock. That is true, Taoiseach. So actually,
You're talking now without even seeing our legislation.
but you're talking about but Taoiseach, you are Taoiseach. You are talking. You present it as if we rely on a veto and a decision of the Security Council. No, it's not true. It is in black and white in the law, black and white. Not just the UN Security Council, but the UN General Assembly. And so, what this is actually about is if there was a regional peacekeeping mission, it could be endorsed by the UN General Assembly by a majority vote, and Irish troops could then participate in it. Do you accept that? So therefore there is no veto.
That's what we're proposing.
No, that's in the law now, the 2006 Act, Taoiseach. It is. There is no such thing as a veto. It's an absolute red herring in this debate. The other thing that's dragged in as an example of how we need to be able to do it is the idea of, well, we have to go and get citizens from abroad and we're currently blocked from doing it. Again, that's a red herring. It's not true. In the 2006 Act, there's a series of exceptions set out where the triple lock does not apply. One of them, F, is undertaking humanitarian tasks in response to an actual or potential disaster or emergency. That covers it. So the Taoiseach is not able to come up with any examples where this triple lock prevents us sending troops. And that's because the truth is that this is about sending troops on US-led missions, NATO-led missions into the likes of it absolutely is. Final thing I'll say to you, in terms of Shannon Airport, your policy is hear no evil, see no evil. Is to say, no, don't worry, there's no weapons going through Shannon Airport. A US general on his way to Israel was on a transporter, a C-17 in Shannon Airport last month, and you did not inspect the C-17.
Your time is up. Your time is up, Deputy. Deputy, will you have a bit of manners, please? Your time is up. You got your 10 minutes. So, I wasn't here. I'm chairing. I'm chairing now. You sit down there now. You sit down there now. Now, Sinn Féin, please. Deputy.